In this lesson, we will cover modeling conduit and cable trays and adjusting conduit and cable tray types. To model conduit or cable trays, switch to the Systems ribbon. In the electrical panel, you can see a cable tray tool and a conduit tool. Let's start with cable tray. I'll zoom into the corridor and we'll place a cable tray down the center of the corridor. The first thing you want to do when creating cable trays is select the appropriate type that you want to place. You can expand the type selector and select any of the available types. You can then adjust the size with the width and height controls, and then the middle elevation, which is measured from the reference level, which is in the Properties palette. So you want to make sure you're modeling at the correct elevation. I'll click 2 points to place a cable tray and then click Modify to end the command, and we'll just have this floating out here in the middle for now. And then I'll activate the conduit tool, and you can see that the options are very similar. Once again, you can expand the type selector and choose the type that you want to place, and then you can control the diameter and the middle elevation. In this case, I'll start in the electrical room, and then I'll come out into the corridor and we'll route some conduit through the corridor. So essentially you're just clicking to sketch lines, and then the conduit or cable tray will be placed along those lines that you're sketching. One thing I want to point out is that the conduit was created at single line, whereas the cable tray is double line. And that is the default display at the medium level of detail. If I switch to coarse, both of them will be single line, and if I switch to fine, then they'll both be double line. Now you can use another detail level and then override this setting for you can override the detail level for conduit or for cable trays in the Visibility Graphic Overrides dialog if you wanted them to appear differently, such as conduit appearing double line when the view is set to a medium level of detail. Alright, let's create a section, and one important thing to do is to coordinate as you're creating conduit and cable trays. And when I open this up, you can see here my conduit and the cable tray is running directly through the ceiling. But with it selected, I can adjust the middle elevation in the options bar, or if I know the bottom elevation or top elevation that I want, I can adjust either of those in the Properties palette. So if I set this to 10 feet, if we want this above the ceiling, then I can control the bottom elevation. And then similarly here, conduit, I can control top, middle, or bottom elevation. So we'll move those up. And then once again, if you wanted to switch to the fine level of detail, that will control how they appear in a section view as well. As far as the options when creating conduit and cable tray, in the options bar you'll notice, in the contextual ribbon, you'll notice several options here. And the justification parameters, that will, since we're modeling conduit, if you're modeling eccentric reducers versus concentric, you could adjust the justification settings in order to model that. It does get a little tricky when you're trying to connect conduit to other conduit if the justifications do not match. Automatically connect, that will, just like it says, automatically connect. So if I simply change I'm going to change it to 10 feet, and then we'll do a cross. And when I do, a conduit junction box was automatically added, and that's because automatically connect was selected. If I deselect that and then do the same thing, Revit does not connect those two conduits. So typically you'll model with automatically connect selected. If you want to begin from the end of an existing run, you can use inherit elevation and inherit size And just like it says, it'll inherit that elevation and size if you do not know what that is at. I will select Add Vertical, and then if let's say I was dropping down to the ground, I'll change it to 0, and then I click at the end of this run. And what is happening here is that there is a vertical drop that is added, and that's because Add Vertical was selected. Change Slope, it would simply change the slope and it would slope down to the point that I selected. And so that's what these Add Vertical and Change Slope options will do. And then lastly, tag on placement. If this is toggled on, then a tag will be placed on the conduit as you create each segment. Place a couple there and you can see a tag is added. And once again, these options are available when creating cable trays, and the only thing is that the Add Vertical and Change Slope are not available for cable trays. Now, to wrap up, let's discuss the conduit and cable tray types. So if I select a cable tray and click Edit Type, you can see things like horizontal bend and vertical inside bend and outside bend and T and cross. And so these will control the fittings that are used when you are routing cable trays. And then similarly for conduit, these types, the fitting types are controlled in the cable tray type. And for each one there are two system families. So for conduit, there's conduit with fittings and conduit without fittings. I will click OK. And one more thing that I'll show here as we wrap up. So I'll activate the conduit tool, and if I route at an elevation of 10 feet, and then we'll have Add Vertical selected, and I change it to 11, and you can see that when I move my cursor that there is a cannot place symbol. And so when you get something like this, that means that there's not enough room for that fitting to be placed appropriately. Or in some cases, if it was too small, you may not ever get that option to get it to place correctly. But in this case we did. We had enough room. 6 inches was enough to place our fittings there. But when you have that cannot place option like we have right here, that means there's not enough room for those fittings to be placed.